My parents paid for my brother's dream wedding, but when I asked for help, they called me selfish. I should have seen it coming. I don't know why I thought this time would be different. Maybe I wanted to believe that my parents would finally see me, not as the afterthought, not as the one who always had to settle for less, but as their child, just like him. My brother Daniel had always been the golden one. The one who got brand new clothes while I wore his hand-me-downs. The one who had tutors when he struggled in school while I was left to figure things out on my own. The one whose college tuition was paid in full while I scraped by on scholarships and part-time jobs. And now, the one who had a wedding straight out of a movie, paid for, down to the last flower petal, by our parents. It wasn't jealousy, at least not in the way people like to label it. It was exhaustion. It was the weight of a lifetime of knowing, deep down, that I would never matter to them the way he did. And yet, when I needed help, not for some extravagant wedding, not for anything frivolous, but just a little financial support to keep myself from drowning, I was met with nothing but disappointment. "We've already done so much for you," my mother had said, her voice thick with condescension. My father simply shook his head, like I had asked for the world. "You need to be responsible. We can't just keep giving you handouts." Handouts. The word lodged in my throat like a stone, choking me with anger and disbelief. A $50,000 wedding wasn't a handout, but a few thousand to help me get through a rough patch was? I didn't argue. Not at first. I nodded, swallowed my pride, and left, but the resentment simmered beneath my skin like a slow burn. That night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling of my tiny apartment, the same apartment I could barely afford while working 2 jobs, I felt something inside me shift. Maybe it was the realization that they would never change. Maybe it was the quiet, gut-wrenching truth that no matter how hard I tried to be the good child, it wouldn't make a difference. They had made their choice a long time ago. And now, it was time for me to make mine. The next morning, I sent a message to the family group chat, short and direct. "Thanks for making it clear where I stand. I won't be begging for scraps anymore." Then I blocked their numbers. I didn't expect a response, but when Daniel's name popped up on my screen, my hands tightened around my phone. "You're seriously overreacting," he scoffed. "Mom and Dad have done plenty for you." I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Enjoy your wedding, Daniel," I said before hanging up. "Let him have it all, the parents, the money, the attention." I was done waiting for something that was never mine to begin with. But as I sat in the silence of my apartment, the anger didn't fade. If they wanted to treat me like I didn't matter, I'd make sure they felt the consequences of that decision. They had underestimated me for the last time. Days passed, then weeks, and I didn't hear a word from them. No calls, no messages, nothing. At first, it stung. Some small, pathetic part of me had hoped they would reach out, that they would realize how much they had hurt me and try to make things right. But silence was its own answer. They didn't care. And the longer I sat with that truth, the more it solidified into something colder, something sharper. I wasn't angry anymore. I was done. Completely, utterly done. I started focusing on myself, working extra shifts, saving every dollar, cutting out anything that wasn't necessary. I didn't have a safety net, but I had determination. And that was more than they had ever given me. Then, one evening, as I was walking home from work, my phone buzzed. It was my aunt, one of the few family members who had ever really seen me. "I don't want to stir things up, but I thought you should know. Your parents are telling everyone you threw a tantrum over money and cut them off." I stopped in my tracks, the cold night air suddenly feeling suffocating. Of course. They had rewritten the narrative, painted me as the ungrateful, selfish child while playing the role of the generous, long-suffering parents. And everyone, predictably, was eating it up. I clenched my jaw, my grip tightening around my phone. I shouldn't have been surprised. This was exactly the kind of thing they would do. But what they didn't realize was that I wasn't the same person anymore. I wasn't just going to sit back and take it. That weekend, I made a decision. I went to Daniel's wedding. Not as a guest. Not to make amends. But to make a point. I arrived at the venue, dressed in the nicest outfit I owned. Not flashy, but enough to make sure I didn't look like the struggling sibling they wanted to paint me as. The second I walked in, I saw the whisper start. My parents stiffened when they noticed me, their forced smiles faltering for just a second before they recovered. Daniel, dressed in his overpriced tux, approached with a smirk. "Changed your mind about the family, huh?" he said, voice dripping with condescension. I looked him dead in the eyes. "No, I just wanted to see what $50,000 of favoritism looks like in person." His smirk disappeared. My mother let out a sharp breath, already gearing up for damage control. But before she could speak, I turned to the guests. The relatives, the friends, the people who had heard their version of the story. Since my parents like telling stories, let me share one too, I said, my voice calm, steady. And then, I laid it all out. The favoritism. The excuses. The blatant disregard for me. Time and time again. The guests shifted uncomfortably, some exchanging glances, others avoiding eye contact entirely. My mother's face drained of color. My father's lips pressed into a thin line. I didn't care. Let them feel it. Let them know that they couldn't control this narrative anymore. And then, without another word, I turned and walked out, leaving them all in stunned silence. Let them have their perfect wedding. I had finally taken back something far more valuable. My dignity. I didn't look back as I left the wedding. I didn't need to. I could feel the weight of their stares burning into my back, the hushed voices scrambling to make sense of what had just happened. Let them talk. Let them whisper. I wasn't the one lying anymore. I walked out of that venue with my head held high, but the second I got into my car, my hands started shaking. The adrenaline, the years of pent-up frustration, the finality of it all, it hit me at once. I had done it. I had shattered the image they had spent so long carefully crafting. But now what? As I sat there, staring at my reflection in the rearview mirror, a thought crept into my mind, one that made my stomach turn. What if nothing changes? What if they just spin this too? What if they keep twisting the story until I'm the villain no matter what I do? I gritted my teeth, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. No, that wasn't going to happen. This wasn't just about calling them out in public. This was about making sure they never had control over my life again. The next morning, I woke up to a flood of messages. Some from extended family, some from old family friends, and, of course, some from my parents. I didn't even bother opening my mother's text. I knew exactly what it would say. How could you? You embarrassed us. You ruined your brother's wedding, after everything we've done for you. The usual guilt tripping, the same manipulation they had always used to keep me in line. But the most interesting message came from my aunt. You really shook things up last night. People are finally starting to see the truth. That made me pause. I hadn't expected anyone to be on my side. But apparently, my words had hit harder than I thought. I sat with that for a moment, letting it settle. Maybe I hadn't just caused a scene, maybe I had started something bigger. My phone rang, pulling me from my thoughts. Daniel. I let it ring, but when it stopped, another message popped up. You just couldn't stand seeing me happy, could you? I exhaled a sharp laugh. Even now, he thought this was about him. He would never get it. And I wasn't going to waste another second trying to make him understand. Instead, I sent one last message before blocking his number for good. No, Daniel. I just couldn't stand pretending anymore. Blocking Daniel felt like cutting the final thread that had tied me to my family. There was no going back now, not that I wanted to. For the first time in my life, I felt free. No more fighting for their approval, no more swallowing my pride just to keep the peace. They had shown me exactly where I stood, and I had finally accepted it. But freedom didn't mean instant peace. The next few days were a whirlwind of emotions, relief, anger, and an odd sense of loneliness I hadn't expected. Not because I missed them, but because I was stepping into something unknown. Who was I without the weight of their expectations? Without the constant battle for scraps of affection? It was a question I didn't have the answer to yet. What I did know was that I needed to move forward. So, I threw myself into work, saving every penny, focusing on myself in a way I never had before. It felt good, better than I expected. But just when I thought I was finally done with the past, my aunt called again. Your parents are in damage control mode, she said. They're telling everyone you've always been difficult, that you lashed out because you're jealous of Daniel's success. I rolled my eyes. Of course, they were. Let them, I said, leaning back against my couch. I don't care anymore. But my aunt hesitated. I think they're starting to realize they pushed too far. Your dad mentioned something about reaching out. That caught me off guard. I had spent my whole life being dismissed, ignored. Why now? A week later, I got my answer. A message from my mother popped up on my phone, short and to the point. We need to talk. No apology. No acknowledgement of what they had done. Just an expectation that I would come running back, like I always had before. I stared at the screen, debating whether to respond. I could ignore it. Walk away completely. But a part of me wanted to see what they had to say. Not because I was hoping for an apology, but because I wanted to hear it for myself. To finally see them for what they were, without the rose-colored lens of wanting to be loved. So, I agreed to meet. When I arrived at the cafe, my mother and father were already seated, their faces tight with frustration. There was no warmth, no regret. Just annoyance, like I was an inconvenience they had to deal with. "I assume you know why we called you here," my father said, arms crossed. "We need to move past all this." I let out a quiet laugh. Move past what? The fact that you funded Daniel's entire life while I had to struggle for everything? Or the part where you called me selfish for asking for help? My mother sighed, exasperated. "You're blowing this out of proportion. Families aren't always equal." There it was. The truth, said so casually, like it was just a fact of life. Like I should have accepted it a long time ago. I leaned forward, looking them both in the eyes. "You're right. Families aren't always equal, and I'm done pretending like this one ever was." And with that, I stood up, left some cash for my coffee, and walked away. This time, for good. Walking out of that cafe felt different from all the other times I had walked away from them before. This time, there was no lingering doubt, no nagging guilt trying to pull me back in. I was done. Fully, completely done. And yet, as much as I had cut them out of my life, they weren't finished with me. The next few weeks were quiet, almost too quiet. No calls, no texts, no more attempts to manipulate me back into place. It was unsettling, but I refused to let it get to me. I kept my head down, focused on myself, and for the first time in my life, I was truly living for me. Then, one afternoon, I got a message from an unknown number. "Hey, it's Melissa. Can we talk?" Melissa was Daniel's fiancée, or rather, his wife now. I hesitated before responding, but curiosity got the best of me. We agreed to meet at a small coffee shop downtown, neutral ground. When I walked in, she was already there, nervously stirring her drink. "I know this is weird," she said as I sat down, "but I needed to see you." I raised an eyebrow. "Okay. Why?" She exhaled slowly, choosing her words carefully. "I heard what you said at the wedding. And at first, I didn't want to believe it. But after the way your parents have been acting lately." She shook her head. "Let's just say I'm starting to see things differently." I studied her, waiting. She swallowed hard. "Daniel and I are having problems, big ones. And a lot of it comes back to them." I leaned back in my chair, crossing my arms. "Let me guess," I said. "They're controlling. They're overbearing. They expect you to be grateful while never actually listening to what you need." She nodded, her eyes wide. "Exactly. And Daniel? He refuses to see it. He just does whatever they want, no questions asked. It's exhausting." I sighed. "That's who they raised him to be." Her fingers tightened around her cup. "I thought marrying him meant I was gaining a family. But now, I don't know." After almost a decade, I felt something close to sympathy for her. She wasn't the enemy. She was just another person caught in their web. "So, what are you going to do?" I asked. She hesitated, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know yet. But I think I needed to hear the truth from someone who's lived it." I gave her a small nod. "Well, you've got it now." She let out a shaky breath, looking down at her hands. I don't want to end up like you." The words stung more than I expected, but I understood what she meant. She didn't want to be the outcast. She didn't want to be the one who had to walk away. But I wasn't going to sugarcoat it for her. "Then you have a choice to make," I said simply. "Stay, and accept that they'll always come first. Or leave, and finally put yourself first." She looked at me, her expression a mix of fear and understanding. I saw it, the realization settling in. Maybe she wasn't ready to make that choice yet. But sooner or later, she would have to. Just like I did. A week passed after my conversation with Melissa, and I didn't hear from her again. I wasn't surprised. She had her own battles to fight, and whether she was ready to face them or not was her decision. I had spent too much of my life worrying about family dynamics that were beyond my control. I wasn't about to take on someone else's burden. My focus was on moving forward, on building a life that didn't revolve around trying to earn love from people who had already decided I wasn't worth it. But just when I thought I had finally closed that chapter, the past found a way to claw its way back in. One evening, after a long shift, I came home to an envelope taped to my apartment door. There was no return address, but I knew who it was from before I even opened it. Inside was a letter from my mother, handwritten in her perfect cursive. "This has gone on long enough. Families don't turn their backs on each other. We love you, but you have to stop holding on to resentment. Daniel and Melissa are expecting a child now. We don't want you to miss out on being part of their lives." My stomach twisted as I read the words. Not because I felt any urge to go back, but because it was just more of the same. No acknowledgement of what they had done. No apology. Just another attempt to guilt me into falling back in line. And the mention of a baby? That was nothing more than another tactic, a new reason for me to be the bigger person, to overlook years of neglect in favor of family unity. I placed the letter on the counter and stared at it for a long moment, waiting to see if any part of me wanted to reconsider. But all I felt was exhaustion. I pulled out my phone, snapped a picture of the letter, and sent it to my aunt with a simple message. "They never change." Her response came almost instantly. "They won't. But you already knew that." She was right. I did know that. And this time, I wasn't going to let myself get pulled back into the cycle. The next morning, I mailed the letter back to my parents without a note, without a response, just their own words returning to them. A few days later, my phone rang. My mother's name flashed across the screen. I didn't answer. A voicemail popped up minutes later. "I hope you're happy. I hope you realize what you're throwing away." I deleted it without listening to the rest. I wasn't throwing anything away. I was finally choosing myself. I had no regrets. Life moved on, and so did I. Cutting them off wasn't easy, but each day that passed without their interference felt like another layer of weight lifting off my shoulders. No more guilt-tripping messages, no more expectations, no more feeling like I was never enough. My focus was on myself now. On building something real, something that belonged to me and no one else. I picked up extra hours at work, started saving more aggressively, and even allowed myself to think about the future in a way I never had before. For so long, I had been stuck in survival mode, constantly bracing for the next disappointment. But now I was free to dream. Then, one afternoon, I got a message from my aunt. "You might want to check your parents' social media." I hesitated before opening the app, unsure if I even wanted to know what they were up to. But curiosity got the best of me. The first thing I saw was a long post from my mother, accompanied by a picture of her and Daniel, smiling like the perfect family. We've always tried to do right by both of our children, but sometimes, no matter how much love you give, some people choose to walk away. We can only pray that one day, they find their way back. My stomach twisted, not with sadness, but with sheer disbelief. Even now, after everything, they were still trying to rewrite the story. Still playing the victims, still painting me as the ungrateful one who abandoned them. I exhaled slowly, staring at the screen. I could have responded. I could have exposed them right then and there, told everyone exactly how they had treated me my whole life. But I didn't. Because the truth was, I didn't owe them anything, not my silence, not my anger, not even my attention. Instead, I logged out, deleted the app, and went on with my day. Let them say whatever they wanted. Let them play the role of the heartbroken parents while basking in the attention of their golden child. I had spent enough years trying to prove myself to people who had already made up their minds about me. I wasn't going to waste another second on it. That weekend, I took a trip. A real one, not a rushed weekend escape but an actual getaway for myself. I booked a small cabin by the lake, packed a few essentials, and left my phone on silent the entire time. To enjoy the peace and my own company, I wasn't looking over my shoulder, waiting for the next emotional blow. I sat by the water, breathed in the fresh air, and let myself exist without the weight of their expectations pressing down on me. It was in that quiet, in the stillness of finally being alone on my own terms, that I realized something. I wasn't lost. I wasn't broken. I wasn't the villain in their carefully crafted story. I was simply free. And that was something they would never be able to take away from me again. I felt like I was in control. No more waiting for their approval, no more hoping they'd finally treat me like I mattered. I had built something for myself, a quiet, steady kind of happiness that didn't rely on anyone else. Work was going well, I was saving money, and I had even started looking into moving to a better apartment. But just when I thought I had fully closed the door on my past, another knock came. This time, it was Daniel. He showed up outside my place unannounced, leaning against his car like we were just two siblings catching up. "We need to talk," he said as soon as I opened the door. I crossed my arms, blocking the entrance. "There's nothing left to say." He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Look, I get it. You're pissed. But can we stop pretending like you're some kind of victim here? You chose to walk away." I let out a dry laugh. "Yeah, I did. After years of being treated like an afterthought. After watching you get everything while I was left to fend for myself." His jaw tightened. "It's not my fault Mom and Dad helped me more. No, but it's your fault for acting like that was normal. His silence told me everything. He didn't want to admit it. He didn't want to face the truth. That he had benefited from their favoritism while I had suffered because of it. Melissa told me she met with you, he finally said, changing the subject. She thinks you might be right about our parents. That surprised me. I had assumed she would push everything aside for the sake of keeping the peace. And what do you think? I asked, studying his face. He hesitated, then exhaled sharply. I don't know. I just know that things have been different since the wedding. They won't stop talking about you, about how you abandoned them. It's like they need you to be the bad guy. I raised an eyebrow. And you're just now noticing? His lips pressed into a thin line. I don't want to fight. He trailed off, shaking his head. Maybe you were right to leave. The words were barely above a whisper, but I heard them. I saw something I had never seen in Daniel before. Doubt. The certainty he had always carried, the unwavering belief that our parents could do no wrong, was starting to crack. I could have taken that moment to gloat, to rub it in. But I didn't. Because at the end of the day, it didn't change anything for me. I had already made my choice. Figure it out for yourself, Daniel, I said, stepping back inside. I'm done waiting for anyone to catch up. And with that, I shut the door, leaving him standing there alone, just like I had been my entire life. After Daniel showed up at my place, I expected some kind of fallout, another dramatic attempt from my parents to drag me back into their mess. But nothing came. No calls. No messages. Just silence. At first, I wasn't sure what to make of it. Had Daniel finally confronted them? Had Melissa put her foot down? Or were my parents simply moving on without me, shifting the narrative yet again to make themselves look like the victims? I told myself it didn't matter. I wasn't going to waste energy wondering what they were saying behind my back. But deep down, I knew the silence wouldn't last forever. And I was right. A few weeks later, my aunt called. Your dad's in the hospital, she said, her voice cautious. Heart issues. Nothing too serious, but I figured you should know. I sat there, gripping my phone, unsure how to respond. The old version of me, the one who always caved, who always put their feelings above my own, might have rushed to his bedside, desperate to prove I still cared. But I wasn't that person anymore. Are they expecting me to visit? I finally asked. My aunt sighed. I don't know. Your mom's been playing it up like a tragedy, telling everyone how much stress they've been under lately. I let out a dry laugh. Stress? They had spent years tearing me down, ignoring me, and casting me aside. Now, suddenly, they wanted sympathy? Are you going? I asked. My aunt hesitated. I haven't decided. But listen, if you don't want to see them, don't let anyone guilt you into it. She paused, then added, not even yourself. That hit harder than I expected. Because the truth was, I did feel guilty. Not because I owed them anything, but because walking away had always felt like something temporary. Like one day maybe, things would change. But this felt final. My father wasn't invincible. Time was catching up to him, to all of them. I had to ask myself a question I had been avoiding for a long time. When they're gone, will I regret not being there? I didn't have an answer yet. But I knew I had one chapter left to figure it out. I sat with the decision for a long time, turning it over in my mind like a coin, weighing the past against whatever was left of my conscience. My father was in the hospital. He wasn't dying, but he wasn't invincible either. A part of me wondered if this was supposed to be the moment where everything changed, the part in the story where I forgave, where we reunited, where the years of resentment melted away because life was too short to hold grudges. That was what they wanted, wasn't it? For me to show up, to prove that no matter how badly they had treated me, I would always come back in the end. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized something. I had already made peace with losing them. Not just in a physical sense, but in every way that mattered. The truth was, I had spent my whole life mourning a family that never really existed. I had grieved the parents I wished I had, the brother who might have stood up for me, the childhood that could have been different. And now, standing at this crossroads, I saw it clearly. There was nothing left to grieve. So, I didn't go. I didn't send a message, I didn't make a call, and I didn't let their crisis become my burden. And just like that, time moved on. My father recovered, my mother continued spinning her stories, and Daniel remained the son who would always be enough for them. But I wasn't part of that world anymore. I had chosen myself. I moved to a new city, built a life that wasn't weighed down by their expectations, and surrounded myself with people who valued me. Not because of obligation, but because they wanted me in their lives. That was when I truly understood something. Family isn't about blood. It's about respect. About the people who show up for you, who treat you as an equal, who don't demand loyalty while giving nothing in return. My parents had never been those people for me. And that was okay. Because I had finally stopped chasing after something that was never mine to begin with. And in the end, walking away wasn't just the hardest thing I had ever done, it was the best.
My parents said I wasn't worth a big wedding. Now they're furious I didn't invite them. I used to believe that love was measured in effort. That when you cared about someone, you showed it in tangible ways. Not just words, not just empty reassurances, but in action. My parents had spent their lives proving that belief to be a lie. Their love, if it could even be called that, was conditional, selective, rationed out in careful portions, given only to those they deemed worthy. And in their eyes, I had never quite made the cut. I watched it happen again and again, always from the sidelines, like an afterthought in my own family. When my sister Lillian got married, they spared no expense. She had the grand ballroom of an upscale hotel, a Vera Wang dress tailored to perfection, and a guest list so long they had to rent extra seating. My parents beamed in every photo, their pride radiating from them like light from a star. She was their golden child, their firstborn, their perfect daughter, and they gave her the wedding of her dreams without hesitation. Then came my brother Daniel. His wedding wasn't as extravagant, but it was still lavish. A vineyard ceremony with imported floral arrangements, a custom tuxedo, and a honeymoon in Greece fully funded by our parents. A man should have a proper send-off into marriage, my father had said with a firm nod, as if his word was law. My mother had nodded along in agreement, dabbing at happy tears during the toast. And then there was me. We can't afford it again. Just have something small. You're not the type for a big wedding anyway. Each sentence was a dagger, slipping between my ribs with casual ease. The first time they said it, I told myself it was just bad timing. Maybe they had spent too much on my siblings. Maybe it wasn't personal. But the more I thought about it, the clearer the truth became. It was never about money. It was about me. I wasn't worth it to them. I wasn't the daughter they boasted about at dinner parties, the one who could do no wrong. I wasn't the son who carried my father's name with pride, fulfilling some archaic notion of legacy. I was the afterthought, the one who didn't deserve the same love, the same effort. I tried to rationalize it, tried to convince myself that a small wedding could still be special. But then came the final insult, one that left no room for doubt. "We'll contribute a little," my mother had said over the phone, her voice almost bored. "Maybe a few hundred, but we can't be paying for anything big. And honestly, why would you want that kind of attention? It's just not you. Not me." As if I had been mistaken about my own dreams, my own desires. As if the simple wish to be celebrated, to be cherished in the same way my siblings had been, was somehow out of character for me. That was the moment I decided. I would have the wedding of my dreams. Without them. Planning a wedding without my parents should have been difficult. There should have been obstacles, doubts, hesitation. But there weren't. The moment I stopped waiting for their approval, for their presence, for their reluctant scraps of support, something inside me came alive. I had always been the child who tried too hard, who sought validation that would never come. But this time I refused to beg. My fiancé Ethan saw the shift in me almost immediately. "Are you sure?" he asked one night, as we sat at our kitchen table, guest lists and venue options spread between us. "I don't want you to regret this later." I looked at him, at the only person who had ever made me feel truly chosen, and I smiled. I've never been more sure of anything. And so, we planned a wedding that was ours, a beautiful ceremony by the sea, with an intimate guest list of people who actually cared about us. My friends, who had become my real family over the years, rallied around me in a way my parents never had. They helped me pick out my dress, a dress I bought with my own money, without a single cent from my parents. They arranged flowers, coordinated decorations, and made sure every detail was perfect. Not once did I miss my parents. Not once did I wish they were there. And when the day finally arrived, I stood at the altar with the waves behind me and the love of my life before me. And I felt whole. I felt seen. I felt worthy. But my parents? Oh, they weren't nearly as happy. I knew they would find out. I had wanted them to find out. Maybe that was petty, but I didn't care. After years of being treated like I didn't matter, I wanted them to see that I had moved on without them, that they had no power over me anymore. The first call came from my mother. I let it go to voicemail. Then came my sister, Lillian, the golden child, who had been too busy to help me plan anything but suddenly had all the time in the world to be outraged on our parents' behalf. How could you do this? Her voice was sharp with disbelief, like she couldn't comprehend the idea that I had done something without their approval. Mom's crying. Dad's furious. You didn't even invite them. I didn't answer right away. I let her sit in her anger, let her feel the weight of the silence. Then I spoke, my voice calm, measured. They didn't want to be part of it. Why would I invite people who made it clear I wasn't worth the effort? A pause, a sharp inhale. Then, "You're being dramatic." I laughed. Actually laughed. Was it dramatic when they spent thousands on your wedding? When they funded Daniel's honeymoon? But when it was my turn, suddenly they couldn't afford it? Lillian's silence was answer enough. Then, after a long beat, she tried again, softer this time. "They're still our parents." "Maybe to you," I said, my voice unwavering. "But to me, they're just people who made it clear I wasn't good enough, and I don't need them anymore." I hung up before she could say another word. I thought that was the end of it, that they would stew in their anger, that I had finally closed the chapter on this painful part of my life. But then, something happened, something I never saw coming. A week after my wedding, a letter arrived. Not an email, not a voicemail. A letter from my father. I hesitated before opening it, my pulse thudding in my ears. And then, as my eyes scanned the words, the ground beneath me seemed to shift. Because there, written in cold, unfeeling ink, was a truth that made everything so much worse. I was never meant to be theirs. I was never supposed to exist. And suddenly everything, the neglect, the favoritism, the way they had always kept me at arm's length, made perfect sense. I had spent my entire life trying to be enough for a family that had never wanted me in the first place. And now I had to decide what to do with that truth. I read the letter once, then twice, and still, my brain refused to process the words. My hands trembled, gripping the paper so tightly that the edges crumpled beneath my fingers. My father's handwriting, so precise, so deliberate, felt like a knife carving into my soul. "You were never meant to be ours. We did what we could, but you must understand. We had no choice. It was never the same with you. It was never supposed to be." I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears, a deep rhythmic thud that drowned out the quiet hum of my living room. The weight of those words pressed down on me, suffocating, crushing. What did he mean? What was he trying to say? I felt Ethan's presence before I even saw him. He had been in the other room, letting me deal with my family's chaos on my own terms. But now he stood in the doorway, his brow furrowed in concern. "Babe?" His voice was cautious, careful, like he could already sense that something was terribly, terribly wrong. "What's that?" I swallowed hard, forcing myself to breathe, to think, to exist beyond the sheer panic clawing at my chest. I could have kept it to myself. I could have folded the letter back up, tucked it away, pretended it didn't exist. But I had spent my entire life hiding from the truth. Whatever this was, I wasn't going to run from it, so I handed it to him. Ethan's eyes scanned the paper, his expression shifting from confusion to disbelief to something darker, something I couldn't quite name. "What the hell does this mean?" he asked, his voice sharp now, edged with a protectiveness that made my heart ache. "I don't know," I admitted, "but I'm going to find out." And I knew exactly where to start. If there was one person who knew the truth and would be too arrogant to properly hide it, it was Lillian. She had always been the one who played mediator in the family, the golden child who kept the peace when things got messy. If there was a secret buried in our past, she would know about it. And more importantly, she wouldn't be able to resist letting something slip. I called her, my fingers tightening around my phone as it rang. She answered on the third ring. "Oh, so now you want to talk?" I didn't have time for her self-righteous bullshit. "What did Dad mean?" I asked, cutting straight to the point. In the letter he sent me. What did he mean when he said I was never meant to be theirs? Silence. A sharp, unnatural silence that stretched between us like a chasm. For a brief, fleeting moment, I thought she might actually tell me. That for once in her life she might set aside whatever twisted loyalty she had to our parents and give me the truth. But then she laughed. A bitter, hollow sound. You're being dramatic again, she said, her voice clipped. Dad's just trying to get under your skin. You know how he is. I clenched my jaw. So you've seen the letter? A pause. Just long enough to confirm what I already suspected. She knew. She had known all along. I have to go, she said quickly, her tone suddenly flustered. I don't have time for this. Lillian, don't you dare hang up. Click. The call cut off. I stared at my phone, my breath coming in short, uneven bursts. My sister was a lot of things. Selfish, dismissive, cruel when it suited her. But she was also smart. And if she was running from this conversation, then that meant one thing. The truth was worse than I imagined. I wasn't stupid. If Lillian was going to stonewall me, then my parents would be even worse. There was only one person left who might talk. My Aunt Susan. She was my mother's younger sister, the one relative who had always treated me with something close to real affection. We weren't particularly close, but she had been the only family member who ever bothered to check in on me outside of obligatory holiday gatherings. If there was anyone who might tell me the truth, it was her. I drove to her house that same evening, my stomach twisting in knots the entire way. I didn't call ahead. I didn't give myself time to hesitate. I needed answers, and I needed them now. She answered the door almost immediately, blinking at me in surprise. Oh, what a nice surprise. Come in, sweetheart. I didn't move. Didn't even try to play along. Did my parents adopt me? I asked, my voice firm, steady. Susan froze. For a second I thought she might try to deny it, to brush me off the way Lillian had. But then her shoulders sagged, and a long, exhausted sigh escaped her lips. Oh, honey, she murmured, stepping aside. Come in. I followed her into the house, my heart hammering against my ribs. The air was thick with something unspoken, something heavy. She led me to the living room, where she sank onto the couch and motioned for me to sit beside her. She looked at me for a long moment, as if deciding where to start. And then, finally, she spoke. They didn't adopt you, she said carefully. Not in the way you're thinking. I swallowed hard. Then what? Susan hesitated. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she said the words that shattered everything I thought I knew. You're not their child at all. The room tilted. The air in my lungs turned to stone. What? They had you because they had to, she continued, her eyes filled with something I couldn't quite place. You're not biologically related to them, not in the way you think. You were the result of an arrangement, a mistake they couldn't erase. My hands curled into fists. What kind of arrangement? She exhaled shakily. Your mother had an affair, she admitted, with someone they couldn't afford to cross. Someone important. You weren't supposed to happen, but when you did, well, they couldn't just make you disappear. They were forced to keep you. The words felt like a foreign language, something I couldn't quite translate. My mother had an affair. I was the product of that affair. And my parents, no, the people I had thought were my parents, had only raised me because they had no choice. I felt sick. My entire life, I had felt like an outsider in my own family. Like I wasn't quite good enough. Not quite theirs. And now I knew why. I wasn't. A slow, creeping rage curled through my veins. I had spent my entire life begging for their love, for their approval. And all along, I had been nothing more than an obligation to them, a burden they had been forced to carry. I stood abruptly, my vision blurring at the edges. Who was he? I asked, my voice hoarse. Susan hesitated. I don't know, she admitted. They never told me. But whoever he was, they were afraid of him. Afraid. That single word sent a shiver down my spine. Who the hell was my real father? And why had my mother and the man who raised me been so terrified of him? I had spent my entire life searching for a family that had never wanted me. Now I had only one question left. Who was the family I had never known? I left my aunt's house with my mind spinning, my stomach knotted so tightly it felt like I might be sick. The weight of her words clung to me like a second skin, unwanted, suffocating. I wasn't their child. I had never been their child. I had spent my entire life trying to earn love from people who saw me as nothing more than a stain on their perfect little family, an obligation, a reminder of a mistake they had no choice but to raise. And the worst part? I wasn't even supposed to exist. The thought burned through me like acid. Ethan was waiting for me when I got home, his face drawn with concern the moment I stepped through the door. He didn't ask if I was okay, because we both knew the answer. Instead, he just wrapped his arms around me and held me there, letting me breathe, letting me process. But I wasn't done yet. There was still one last truth I needed to uncover. Who was my real father? I sat in my car outside my parents' house. No, not my parents. The people who raised me. The distinction mattered now. The grand house loomed before me, cold and unwelcoming, just as it had always been. For a long time I just sat there, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. Then, with a deep breath, I stepped out and walked to the door. When my mother answered, her face paled. "Oh," she breathed, as if she had seen a ghost. Maybe she had. I didn't wait for an invitation. I pushed past her and into the house, my heart hammering in my chest. My father. No, not my father. The man who raised me. He was in the living room, his expression hardening the moment he saw me. "You have 5 seconds to tell me who he was," I said, my voice low, sharp, "or I swear I will find out myself." My mother flinched. My father, Robert, I reminded myself, forcing his name into my mind, stared at me for a long moment. Then, to my surprise, he let out a bitter laugh. "So, Susan told you," he said flatly. "She told me enough." He shook his head, muttering something under his breath. "I always knew this day would come." "Then you should have prepared a better lie," I shot back. "Now tell me the truth." His jaw clenched. My mother let out a shaky breath, her hands trembling at her sides. She looked at him, her eyes pleading. "Robert, don't. She already knows, Margaret." He turned back to me, his eyes dark and unreadable. "Fine. You want the truth? You were never supposed to be born. Your mother had an affair, and not just with anyone." The air in the room grew heavy. "He was dangerous," Robert continued. "A man with power, a man who didn't take kindly to mistakes." My stomach twisted. "Who?" His lips pressed into a thin line. "His name was Victor Moreau." The name meant nothing to me. But the way Robert said it, the way my mother's breath hitched in fear, told me everything I needed to know. "Who is he?" I demanded. Robert sighed. "You ever wonder why we never let you take an ancestry test? Why we never talked about extended family?" He shook his head. "Victor Moreau isn't just some man. He's the kind of person who makes people disappear when they cross him. He's not just rich. He's untouchable. Old money. The kind of money that buys silence. When Margaret found out she was pregnant, he made it clear. Either we raised you or you wouldn't exist at all." A shiver ran down my spine. "He threatened you?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "He didn't have to." Robert met my gaze, and I saw something I had never seen in him before. Fear. "You don't say no to a Moreau." I felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. All this time I had believed they resented me simply because I was unwanted, but the truth was worse. They weren't just ashamed of me. They were afraid of what I represented, of who I came from. For a long moment, I didn't move, didn't speak. My mind raced with possibilities, with what this meant, with what I was supposed to do now. Somewhere out there was a man I had never met. A man whose blood ran through my veins. A man who had enough power to terrify the people who had raised me into submission. Victor Moreau. I could find him. I could demand answers. But as I stood there, staring at the people who had spent my whole life making me feel small, I realized something. I didn't need to. This wasn't about him. It wasn't about them. It was about me. I didn't need to prove anything to anyone. I didn't need to fight for love that would never come. I didn't need to chase a ghost of a man who had never cared enough to look for me. I already had everything I needed. I turned to Robert and Margaret, two people I would no longer call my parents. "I'm done with you," I said simply. "You don't owe me anything, and I don't owe you anything either. We're finished." Margaret let out a quiet sob. Robert just nodded. Maybe, in his own way, he understood. I didn't look back as I walked out of that house for the last time. When I got home, Ethan was waiting. I fell into his arms, letting out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. He didn't ask me what happened. He didn't need to. He just held me, his warmth grounding me in the present. "I don't need to find him," I whispered. Ethan pulled back slightly, looking into my eyes. "Are you sure?" I nodded. "I have everything I need right here." And I meant it. I had spent my entire life searching for belonging, for love, for proof that I mattered. But in the end, I had found it. Not in the family that never wanted me, not in the bloodline that abandoned me before I was even born. I found it in the people who chose me, in the friends who had been there when my family wasn't, in the man who stood by my side through it all, in myself. I wasn't their child. I wasn't a mistake. I was me, and that was more than enough.